There's this common misconception about Wendy that goes something like this. Wendy is good at farming weak mobs, but bad at killing bosses. I disagree. In my opinion, Wendy is exceptional at both. The reason I think people have that misleading impression about Wendy is that the general tactics for fighting single powerful enemies is just way different and a lot less intuitive than the strategy for fighting armies of things like spiders. In this video, I want to give a rundown of the general strategies that a good Wendy will use when fighting the different kinds of enemies this game will throw at you. If you're interested in learning about this, stick around as I explain how to fight as Wendy. The first thing you should know about Abigail for combat is that in most situations, she should not be your primary source of damage. Abigail is great at killing lots of weak mobs. Since bees, killer bees, and normal spiders can be stun locked, Abigail can pretty much kill an unlimited amount of these guys, since her large area of effect attack, coupled with her rapid attack speed, means these guys never get a chance to retaliate back at her as long as she's attacking. Against mobs that can't be stun locked, she's still extremely good at killing them. She can't stunlock frogs and spelunkies, but these swarming mobs don't have much HP, and Abigail has her shield that limits the amount of attacks that she can get hit by, so she can slaughter armies of these guys without falling. When you move on to things like hounds, spider warriors, or grumblebees, things get a little more iffy. Hounds have 150 HP, can't be stunlocked, and attack very quickly. It's fine to solely rely on Abigail for the first few hound waves. However, if you're trying to sanitize the desert or are facing massive hound waves in the late game, there's a chance that she'll lose if you're fighting during the day. The same is true for spider warriors. They don't attack nearly as quickly as hounds, but they have 400 HP. Unless it's nighttime, you can't solely rely on Abigail to kill an army of them. It gets worse and worse as the enemies get stronger. If you set Abigail against an army of pigmen, she's gonna lose. If you set her loose against an army of merms, she's gonna lose. If you try to make her solo depthworms, clockworks, a tree guard, spider queen, and especially seasonal bosses, she's gonna lose. My general rule for using Abigail against hordes is this. If you're trying to kill a bunch of enemies that are stronger than a spelunky, and you've got health, armor, and the weapon, you should be helping Abigail out as well. Abigail has the potential to hit pretty hard and very fast, but despite this, her damage against a single target is nothing compared to what Wendy can do when she's fighting alongside Abigail. If Abigail is fighting an enemy, she can at most deal 40 damage per second. Even if you're just using a simple axe, and Abigail is dealing her daytime damage, if you help out Abigail, you'll be dealing about 80 damage per second. If you got an actual weapon like a handbat, then Abigail's 40 damage per second turns into 180 damage per second. So if you're up against a small army of decently strong enemies like spider warriors, you should help Abigail out. Let Abigail get the first attack in so that all the spiders aggro onto her, then start killing the warriors off one by one. This way, Abigail acts as both a source of damage as well as a shield, drawing all the aggro and attacks from the army to herself, while you only have to deal with one spider warrior at a time. Fight like that, and you'll be able to kill an army of warriors no matter what time of day it is. Fight like that, and you can do things like eliminate an entire herd of beefalo without using any potions. Now as we shift into fighting even stronger enemies, the tactics of fighting using Abigail also shifts. Unlike the player, Abigail regenerates 1 HP per second, so as long as Abigail isn't defeated, I'd rather she take the damage from attacks rather than Wendy. When you fight relatively strong mobs, like clockwork knights, bishops, or tall birds, and Abigail has a lot of HP left, what I'd do is make her do the first attack. Once the enemy is aggroed onto her, then I'd start attacking. In the case of tall birds, they'll never stop attacking Abigail, so simply wail away at the tall bird without worrying because you're not going to get hit. I'd probably just kite clockwork knights, but when it comes to bishops, I'd let Abigail get the last hit in before they launch their attack so they target her instead of me. If you're rolling with the standard handbat, you're dealing at least 150 damage per second, so the fight will be over very quickly. I'd say there is one enemy in this category that's an exception, and that's the rook. The clockwork rook will deal 45 damage to the player with its charge. However, against mobs like Abigail, its charge deals 200 damage. Because of this, if you don't want to lose Abigail, you're going to assume the role as the shield and protect Abigail by body blocking the rook when it charges. You want to stay close to Abigail so that she can still hit the rook, but far enough so that the rook won't hit her when he comes into contact with you. Finally, we move on to fighting bosses. Bosses typically deal double the damage to mobs. Abigail is a mob, so instead of Deerclops dealing 75 damage to her, she's taking 150 damage per hit. Unless you're loaded with expensive Spectre cure-alls, Abigail is not going to be able to take a lot of hits. In order to avoid this, against anything that can be considered a boss, meaning Spider Queen or Tree Guards and up, you're going to have two objectives. The first is to fight the boss while dodging its hits and kiting. The second is to keep Abigail alive. For most boss fights, keeping Abigail alive is the higher priority than kiting. While alive, Abigail is boosting Wendy's attacks by 54%. This means Wendy alone is hitting about 15% harder than Wilson. When you add the damage that Abigail is also dealing, Wendy is basically hitting as hard or even harder than Wigfred when she and Abigail are attacking the same thing. If Abigail is beaten, Wendy goes from outdamaging Wigfred to West level damage. And if Abigail is beaten, her maximum HP resets to 150 and starts at 0, meaning if you resummon her, she's going to die again in a single hit. This is also not even mentioning the fact that against certain bosses, you also need Abigail for crowd control. So when you're fighting semi-bosses and bosses, the general rule is to keep Abigail alive first and fight the enemy second. Abigail isn't there to take hits for you. She's not there to solo. She's just there to greatly increase Wendy's attack power. So it's your job to make sure she stays in the fight. So that's the general mentality for combat with Wendy. For Spelunkies and anything weaker, it's fine to just let Abigail crush the hordes. For stronger mobs, Abigail is there to weaken the horde and draw their aggro while you pick them off one by one. Against single powerful enemies, she's there to shield you, and you're there to deal the damage. Against bosses, she's there to boost your attacks, and you're there to ensure that she doesn't die. There are exceptions, but in general, that's the mentality you want to have. On top of knowing how to fight certain mobs, you should also know how Abigail works. Abigail has two states, soothe and riled up. In her riled up state, she'll keep her distance from you and attack anything that's either neutral or hostile. This state is pretty straightforward. She can venture far away to attack things, but there is a range for this. If she's too far from Wendy, she will still attack things that are near her, but she will try to get back to Wendy instead of actively chasing enemies. The soothe state is more complex than a riled up state. While in the soothe state, Abigail will stay close to Wendy and will only attack things that are hostile towards Wendy, or things that Wendy initiates an attack against. One extremely important thing that I think many people don't know about the soothe state is that Abigail will only attack things if Wendy is near her. Even if Abigail is getting pummeled by hostile mobs like spiders or spelunkies, if Wendy isn't a few tiles away from her, Abigail will not attack them at all. For new Wendy players, a very common scenario is that Abigail in her soothe state is farming spiders. Wendy runs away, Abigail gets body blocked by spiders, and eventually gets killed because she won't fight them unless Wendy is close to her. So if you see Abigail getting wrecked and you're not near her, make sure you set her to riled up so that she can fight back. While in her soothe state, Abigail will not actively hunt down hostile enemies unless they happen to cross over into her attack range. The only way to make Abigail move to attack something is if you get hit by something or if you initiate an attack against something. Because of this, for most of the boss fights, you want to keep Abigail in her soothe state so that you're the one landing the first hit on the boss, which keeps its aggro on you and not on Abigail. Another sort of advanced tactic that you can use with Abigail is to de-aggro mobs. In this game, most of the mobs will aggro onto whatever hit them last. So even if something has been attacking you, if Abigail attacks them once, then their aggro will be on her. If a mob is aggroed onto Abigail and you de-summon her from a distance, and won't aggro onto you since you're too far away, this means you can effectively de-aggro most mobs by having Abigail attack it once, set her to riled up so that you can run away from her, and then unsummon her, leaving the hostile mob too far away to detect you. This isn't just helpful against hostile mobs, it also really works on neutral ones. If you accidentally attack a pig or a beefalo, set Abigail to riled up, guide the mobs into her area of effect, and then de-summon her. If you're chopping trees and happen to spawn a tree guard, instead of appeasing it with pine cones, you can just have Abigail attack it once and then unsummon her. Another tactic I would consider is keeping Abigail on the move in order to prevent her from being hit. As mentioned before, the area of effect of Abigail's attacks is pretty big. Not only that, but unlike most of the mobs in the game, there is no wind up for her attacks, and she can attack while on the move. Because of this, if you are fighting a horde and you want to preserve Abigail's health, you can set her to the riled up state and run directly away from the horde. For the most part, the horde will not be able to hit her, since she'll be floating towards you, while Abigail still attacks them since her range is so large and her attacks trigger instantly. Earlier I mentioned that against weaker enemies and even some of the tougher ones, you want to use Abigail as a shield and let her take the hits while you also engage in the fight. Something I didn't mention is that the way in which you initiate these fights matters. If you run headfirst into a mob of spider warriors and start swinging, they'll all aggro onto you and you'll probably take a bunch of hits before Abigail draws their aggro away. Same is true for stronger enemies like Clockworks. So in order to initiate conflicts against non-boss enemies, you want to first set Abigail to aggressive, position her in between the enemy and yourself, and then push her into the enemy. This way, all the enemies in the area will be aggroed onto Abigail instead of yourself, which lets you walk away from these fights without being touched. Finally, the last thing Wendy should keep in mind in combat is whether or not she should unsummon Abigail or just let Abigail die. At first this might be a no-brainer because letting Abigail die costs you 30 sanity, reduces her health to 0, and worst of all, brings her max health down to 150. These are all true points, but check this out. If you have a Cistern up, it reduces the amount of time Abigail takes to reach her 600 HP health cap from 2 days to half a day. When Abigail's health cap increases, her current HP will also increase, since it scales up with her health cap. So if she's at full HP and her health cap levels up from 150 to 300, her current HP will also go from 150 to 300. The same thing happens when she levels up from 300 to 600. Therefore, if you have an active Cistern, it effectively allows Abigail to recover 600 HP in half a day, given she falls in battle. Instead of letting her die, if you unsummon her when her health dips below 100, it will take Abigail over an entire day to get back to 600 HP. So if you have an active Cistern, sometimes it's better to just let Abigail reset, because she'll be back to 100% far quicker than if you let her recover naturally. And that's generally the mindset that one should have when fighting using Wendy. If you're new to Wendy, I hope this guide has expanded the horizons of your gameplay from just killing spiders to taking down much bigger game. Obviously, it doesn't encompass everything, but I think this guide covers the general idea of the kind of fighting style that you should be using against the various types of enemies you'll be up against. Like always, thanks for watching, take care, and have a great day.